You guys believe that Jesus is the remedy? That implies that you're broken. I think we're all broken. I think we all have fractured hearts that only Jesus Christ can mend. This morning we're going to talk about a delicate subject, and I want you to know if you have kids in here, we're going to be talking about some subject matter sexually that you may or may not want them to hear. So I just want to tell you on the front end, if you want to make other arrangements for them so that I don't get any harsh emails later. But we're going to talk about some stuff. I'm going to tell you some real stories of real people, but I'm going to change some names to protect the not-so-innocent. I want to start with a young lady named Karen. Karen's a 31-year-old lady who grew up in a Baptist church. She was a leader in her youth group. And about the age of 15, she started getting some feelings, some emotions of attraction toward other girls. And growing up in church, she didn't know what to do with it. I want to quote for you exactly what Karen said. Growing up in church, I was taught that gay people are immoral unbelievers with a sinister agenda. If the church had simply viewed homosexuality as one of the many other sins that people are drawn to as a result of living in a fallen world and talked openly about various sexual temptations, I would have been able to process it like any other temptation that Christians face. I have another friend who was struggling with some of the same things in high school. She started just feeling strange feelings and emotions toward other girls, and she thought, well, I can't talk to anyone in church. It's the last place in the world I can be honest about this stuff. So she didn't talk about it for a while. Then finally she says, you know what, maybe I should try my youth pastor because I'm a leader in the ministry. We have a good relationship. Of all people, maybe I can talk to him about it. She went to the youth pastor and she did what a lot of us do or would like to do. We're saying something about herself. I have a friend. And so she told the story about this friend, and the youth pastor's response was, and I quote, "You tell your friend that God created Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve," and walked off. I think that many of our youth today in our youth ministries in building C and D are struggling with attraction to the same sex. And yet the understanding of church being homophobic makes it the last place in the world they can share those struggles with. I believe statistically there are many people sitting in this room struggling with the same thing this morning as I'm preaching. Statistics say that 1 out of 33 people in America claim to be gay. In the church, it's about 1 out of 20 who have actually admitted it. So you take 2 rows of chairs in here, it's 1 every 2 rows. You can do the math. There's several people in this room struggling right now. And it's interesting because if you can imagine for a minute how difficult it would be to share same-sex attraction with one of your friends in the church. And it's interesting how someone will share in a life group, I've struggled with alcohol abuse for 30 years. And the immediate response from the Christian group is, we're going to hold you accountable. We're going to walk with you through this. And an understanding with an alcoholic that you're probably going to struggle with alcohol abuse every day for the rest of your life. Or a drug addict. Or a porn addict. And I'm going to call you when you're on your trips, and I'm going to hold you accountable. We're going to give you community. And we do that for every other area of sin in the church except this one. I think the church owes the homosexual community a huge apology, and that may ruffle you incorrectly this morning. We looked at a passage last week in John chapter 8 that talked about the woman caught in adultery. And Jesus made a statement. He said, "He who is without sin cast the first stone." Jesus was the only one without sin in that situation. Jesus was the only one who was justified in throwing a stone. And yet Jesus, the only one who actually could do it and still be lawfully, chose to give compassion instead. What makes us think as Christians who are not perfect that we are able and have the authority and the right to throw a stone at any individual sin on this planet? And yet there is a sin that we have picked as a church and as churches to label as, we'll put that sin over there because that's different from all the rest. It's unbiblical. 91% of outsiders, that's people outside the church under the age of 45, said anti-homosexuality or anti-homosexual accurately describes the church today. 9 out of 10. That it's not that you're against homosexuality, it's that you're against homosexuals. I'm not against alcoholics. I'm against people getting drunk. I'm not against drug addicts. I'm against people being addicted to drugs. Jesus always separated the person and their sin. And Jesus loved the person in spite of their sin, and yet the church has taken this one area and made it the issue. Christians are against the gay lifestyle, but a minority of believers, 39%, embrace Jesus' clear-cut biblical teaching on that divorce apart from infidelity is sin. Christians are much more concerned about cancer than AIDS. And the logic goes something like this: they deserve it. It's the consequences of their actions. And yet, having grown up in church my whole life, many Christians are obese. We eat poorly. We don't take care of our bodies, which is directly related to diabetes, heart failure, and other conditions. And yet no one ever looks at an obese person having a heart attack in the church and saying they deserve it. I called my dad this past week. My dad's a good man, loves Jesus. And I emailed him. I said, hey, I got this topic Sunday. I'm not feeling well. Do you think you could fill in for me? And he emailed back immediately and said, let me pray about it, ... no. So I called him. And I said, Dad, what do you think the big issue with this particular sin is with the church, with Christians? He said, it grosses us out. I thought he's right, because I don't understand it. It grosses me out. And then you know what the next thought that hit me was? Why doesn't my sin gross me out? Jesus says about sin, it's like lukewarm water. I'd rather spit you up. It makes my stomach hurt to the point that I've got to vomit you out of my mouth. Why doesn't my sin gross me out? Why doesn't my lust of women other than my wife gross me out? Why doesn't my tongue make me sick? I've studied this issue a lot. Read a lot of books, had a lot of people send me books, CDs, and I appreciate all of them, emails. And I want you to know as I start this message that after hours of prayer on this issue and a lot of research and a lot of studying, I went to this issue saying, God, I want to take away everything I've ever been taught about this subject, and I want to come at it with just an open mind biblically to see what the biblical themes on sexuality really is. And I want you to know that after studying this topic and thinking and praying, I can't dismiss that the Bible teaches homosexual practice is a sin. And I want you to know that my heart in saying that is, I want you to understand my compassion for you if you're struggling with that. Or maybe if you're not struggling with that and you've chosen, that's my lifestyle and it's not a struggle. Not long ago, a young lady came up to me in the foyer, I guess 2 years ago maybe, and she was teary-eyed. She said, Pastor, I've got one question for you. She said, what do you think about gay people? And I looked at her and I said, I love gay people. And she just started crying more. And she said, I've never heard a pastor say that. And I said, let me tell you, there's lots of people in this place that do things that I don't agree with, but I still love them. I don't have to agree with something in your life to love you. And me and this young lady, we built a relationship over about a year. She doesn't attend here anymore. She left. I've lost contact with her. But we had some great conversations, and one of the conversations we had one time is she said, what do you think of when you think of a gay person? Like, what does the church think of? What do they view? What do they picture? And I said, gay pride weeks, gay parades, women dressed in leather, men dressed in leather, doing weird things and being real proud about it. And I said, what do you think of when you think of Christians? And she said, Jerry Falwell saying, Katrina happened because of homosexuals. And I said, you need to know something. I said, I've been a Christian for 40 years. None of my friends who love Jesus are like Jerry Falwell. And she said, you need to know something. I've been gay for 12 years. None of my friends are like what you just described. And so we started this conversation, this friendship off of, we're not going to stereotype either one with what we have thought or heard about in the past. We're just going to love each other for who we are. And we had a great relationship. And I think God's going to bring that relationship back. I love gay people. I love alcoholics. I love drug addicts. I love porn addicts. I love gossips. You know why? Because I'm one of all those things. I struggle sexually. I struggle with my tongue. I struggle being prideful, just like you. And I'm making sure I'm not looking at one person when saying that, because I know how we are. He looked at me when he said you. I want to tell you some inaccurate assumptions I believe the church has about homosexuals this morning. If you want to write these down, I got some blanks for you. I know we love blanks. Number one, homosexuals are incapable of acting morally. The reason it goes like this, it's best just to avoid homosexuals altogether because every aspect of their life is immoral because of this area of immorality in their life. Can you imagine Jesus avoiding people because of a sin area in their life? You know what he would be at that point? A Pharisee. He would fit right in with our churches today in America because I believe our churches are much more Pharisaical than they are Jesus following. Can you imagine avoiding someone, or can you imagine saying that because you're an alcoholic, I know that you can never be a kind, compassionate person. But because you struggle with gossip, I know you can never have the gift of hospitality. Because you struggle with drug abuse, I know that you can never have the gift of mercy, so no one's ever going to confide in you for sympathy. We don't categorize and lump this with anyone else with all their character, but we do with this area. Number two, the homosexual agenda is to destroy Christianity. All homosexuals are the same mind with a political agenda, and they have an antagonism toward Christians. You know, I've seen some pretty skeptical heterosexuals in my ministry. I've seen some pretty antagonistic heterosexuals. I've seen some Christian zealots that scare me more than anyone else. Swaggart stood before his church one day holding a Bible, true story, and he said, if a gay man looks at me as if he's even somewhat attracted to me, I will kill him. James Dobson, who I respect and churches follow a lot of times, said something that I totally disagree with. He said, if someone is gay in your family, you must make clear to them that you will never accept that reality. The problem is when you tell someone that you won't accept that reality, what you're saying is I don't accept you. God hates sin. God hates you. Now you may say that's not what I mean, but you need to understand that's what's heard. Can you imagine Jesus saying, I'll never accept the reality of your identity as a person? Yeah, I don't want homosexuals to view all Christians as the extremists that the media has given the national mics to. A lot of these guys I hear and I wish they would just be quiet. It just makes it harder for those that are actually trying to be like Jesus. And I also understand the media gives the mics to extremist gay people. And it makes it hard for gay people who are living normal lives. You know, the more gay people I've gotten to know, the more friendships I've built, the more I realize that their lives are pretty normal. They don't have a hidden agenda to warp your children or destroy our churches. That they pay bills, they get their oil changed, they rotate their tires, they have to buy clothes. Number three, in getting to know and meeting more gay people and hearing their stories, I've come to realize that their sexuality is not something they can just turn off. You see, I've always thought that, or the answer is just stop, right? Would you ever use that wisdom for someone else in a life group or a Bible study who says, I'm struggling with this kind of abuse? Well, just stop. We realize that other areas of struggle may be a lifetime of struggle. And the answer is not just to stop. It would be like someone coming to you, if you're a straight person, saying you need to just stop having an attraction to the opposite sex. It has become who you are, it has become your identity, and also it's become your community, and it's become your accountability and your support group. And until the church is willing to give support groups to people who struggle in this area of sin, you can't expect anyone just to stop without any support or accountability or help in the process. You know why people go to gay churches with gay theology? Because they have support for them. You know why people come to Freedom at the Ridge on Monday night? Because we have support for them. You know why people go to AA? And even if they haven't had a drink for 20 years, they still don't miss a week? Because there's support for them. Number 4, it is best to avoid friendships with homosexuals. And yet, when I read my Bible, Jesus hung out with all sorts of people. Religious people are always troubled by the relationships that Jesus kept. When we avoid gay people, we put barriers up. And we basically are telling God, you won't use me in a relationship with that person to bring Jesus to them. Austin is a very attractive city for gay people. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to come here. Do you know that? It's full of people who need to understand who Jesus is. Gay and straight. And yet, if I avoid a certain group of people because of a certain kind of lifestyle that I consider sinful, then I would have to take hundreds of thousands of people that come through the city of Austin and say, God, I'll share you with anyone except that group. It's interesting, too, if we tell our people, our children to shun gay people, because you need to understand that our children see it a lot more than we see it. And for them to shun some of their friends because you as a parent don't like that lifestyle is simply not Jesus-like. Let me tell you a story about Penny. Penny was born and raised in England, where she attended an Anglican church. Started feeling same-sex attraction in her teenage years. And I quote, she said, "Why would I go to a church to ask for spiritual advice? They already have thrown heaps of guilt on me and condemned me before I've ever stepped my foot into the door." When Penny was 22, she actually came to America to work at a Christian camp of all things, still struggling, not telling anyone. She said, the thing that threw me off the most when I was working at the Christian camp is how the Christian volunteers and workers at this camp continue to have coarse jokes about gay people. At the end of the camp, she decided to take a trip to San Francisco to see some friends that she had lost contact with. And one of the Christian workers there said this when finding out she was going to San Francisco. "So, you're going to the gay bay where all the fags go to rot." Not having a clue if she was struggling with that area in her life or not of sexuality. Penny went on to move to Santa Cruz. She became a volunteer hotline phone operator at a gay center to help troubled teens who are calling in looking for help and encouragement, what she didn't get in the church when she was a teenager. And she said the thing that continued to blow me away as I went to this place to try to help people was almost daily I would come to my car and the Christians had put a Christian track on my windshield. If you don't know what a Christian track is, maybe you didn't have the ability to grow up Baptist like I did. A Christian track is a little booklet that basically tells you to trust Jesus or you're going to hell. And usually it has like flames on the front. And she said people would put these tracks in my car and they would say things like, homosexuality is the cancer of today's society. You're going to hell if you try to help those people. Those people is kind of the way preachers preach about it sometimes, as if they're inanimate objects. And she said what amazed me was that Christians didn't have the guts or the compassion to come talk to me face to face. They would just put the tracks on the car. I see Christians do this with tracks. They'll put them in restaurants. Don't do that. They'll leave them on the... Ask a waiter or waitress sometime, what goes through your mind when a Christian comes in and leaves the tracts on the table? You know what their answer is? Well, it depends on how good they tip. They don't read them. If you don't have the desire and the compassion to build a relationship to get to know me, don't throw a tract at me. Matter of fact, when I talk to waiters and waitresses, they say Christians are the worst. I hate working Sundays because they don't tip and they're rude and everything has to be perfect. And I thought that's just a microcosm of the way the church is viewed today. Matter of fact, I try to tip a ton when I eat out. Because if they ever find out I'm a Christian, I want them to say, yeah, that guy was a good tipper. Let me give you a scenario. An unmarried couple comes into our church. I gather from having conversation with them, there's no rings in their hands, but I gather they're living together. And they say something to me like this. They say, Pastor, we don't necessarily believe in Jesus or believe in all this church stuff, but I want you to know we're kind of open. We're thinking about, it's time to grow up, time to get things straight. And so is it okay if we come to your church and just kind of listen? We would welcome them with open arms. Yes, come, sit, listen. So glad you're here. What if I look out and I see that couple holding hands while I'm preaching? That's great. I'm so glad they're here. What happens if that couple's a gay couple that comes in and says, hey, we don't believe in this Jesus stuff necessarily, but we're curious, we're open. I know they're living together. They come in. What happens when that gay couple sits down and holds their hands in this room? What happens if you're sitting beside them? How are they different theologically in the eyes of God, whether they're an unmarried couple living, cohabitating together outside the covenant of marriage, or a gay couple living together? Theologically, how does that differ? How do you react differently to them? I think it's hypocritical. I think it's unbiblical. I think it's un-Jesus-like. And I think people have good points about the church being homophobic. Jesus goes to the people who have the greatest needs for his help and shows the most compassion to them. We take a whole segment of society that have great needs and we push them aside because we don't like what they do. Just think, if we knew what you do, would we like you? That's too convicting. I'm going to give you a few things here about how I think the church needs to change the stereotypes of this. Some things we can do. Number one, we must understand how younger generations view sexuality. I didn't say agree with it, I don't say condone it or compromise to it, but we need to understand it. We need to understand that our high school students, our college students, our middle school students are living in a candid, open sexuality that you and I never experienced growing up. And my fear is they're doing it without any biblical assistance or counsel because churches don't talk about sex. Every once in a while you hear of say a pastor in Dallas give us a series about sex. And you're thinking, I can't believe he's talking about that in church. Sex is a good thing. Amen. Matter of fact, women, you need to have more sex with your husbands. Amen? Men, you need to have more sex with your wives. Sex is good. God created sex. It's not a back alley, nasty, gross thing you don't talk about because good Christians don't talk about sex. You and I, we grew up in churches where you don't talk about sex. You know the two things you hear about sex growing up? Here it is. Number one, don't have premarital sex. Right? They never tell you what you do if you do have premarital sex and you mess up. They never tell you what to do if someone gets pregnant. Just don't do it. Number two, Jesus is in the backseat of your car when you go on a date and he's watching you. Right? It's no wonder that the view of the church outside the church, of the church inside is their view of sexuality is just negative. I think we ought to have a lot of sex. And my wife was sitting here first hour and I said the same thing. You know why? Because God created it for a man and a woman to enjoy in the covenant relationship of marriage. And I believe our kids, they go to high school, they go to college, and here's what you need to understand about the younger generation. They are tribal in nature. Here's what I mean by that. They get their sense of right and wrong in a big way, at least partly, based on what their friends think about right and wrong. Okay? And they are fiercely loyal to friendships. Okay? Like, for example, they'll bend rules for friends because they're loyalty to friends. Like downloading illegal music and sharing it's just peer-to-peer sharing. All right? Or working at a fast food restaurant and giving your friends some food without paying for it, that's just hooking a brother up. Many heterosexuals fear that we hate all homosexuals. Inside the church and outside the church, they think that we hate homosexuals. You know, I said before in the series that the world knows us more by what we stand against as opposed to what we stand for. Number two, I'll tell you another thing there, that the younger generation is getting disinterested in church because they see all these issues out there like AIDS and poverty, and yet the church just wants to bang on homosexuality instead of doing anything about these issues. Number two, we can't just throw a verse or two at this topic. You see, that's the shallow preaching that decades of preaching have done. My grandfather was a Baptist minister. He would roll over his grave if he knew I was preaching on this today. But we can't just throw a verse at it. That's what we do. We just, well, here's what the Bible says, so case closed. It's not that simple. It's more complex than that. Just like your sexuality is more complex. Just like when you turn 60 and your eyesight's almost gone and you can't hardly hear, and you still lust when a woman walks by because you smell her perfume and you think, why do I still struggle with this? Because you're complex sexually. And sin is complex. It's not that simple. You can't throw a verse at it just like you don't to an alcoholic saying, well, God says take care of your temple. Alcohol's bad, so just stop. Matter of fact, we need to intelligently be able to talk about the verses that we cling to and understand in an intelligent way that people understand it and hear it in compassion. Like some of the verses that are thrown at people, Sodom and Gomorrah. Sodom and Gomorrah is always thrown at people. God condemned Sodom and Gomorrah for the sin of homosexuality. Do you know what the Gay Theology Church now says about that text? Because you need to know this. They teach that the sin in Sodom and Gomorrah was not homosexuality, but rather it was the sin of not being hospitable and not taking care of poor people. And you know where they get that from? And it's a good argument. There's 5 prophets and Jesus that all refer to Sodom and Gomorrah somewhere in the writings of the Scriptures. None of them ever refer to the sin of homosexuality. And many times the sin of hospitality, as in Ezekiel, is referred to, as well as the sin of not taking care of the poor. So that was not a condemnation for homosexuality. Do you know how you would answer that if someone wants to dialogue with you about that? Or is it just, well, that's just stupid? Number 2, Leviticus 18 and 22 has been thrown at the homosexual community from the church for generations. It's the law where it talks about homosexuals will not inherit the kingdom of heaven. And we throw that out there. But you know, Leviticus 18 and 22 talks about long hair, talks about tattoos, talks about not working on the Sabbath, talks about not having clothes that are made of more than one material. And you know what Christians say about that? Well, that code was given to a certain group of people at a certain time. It doesn't apply now. But yet that applies. Romans 1, verse 26 and 27 is always thrown out. And the gay church says that Romans 1, 26 and 27, as well as 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 9, where it says homosexuals will not inherit the kingdom of heaven, which, by the way, there's other sinners listed in there too. That Paul was talking about male prostitution in the temple, and that the sin was not a homosexual going to have sex with a male prostitute in the temple because that was natural sexual activity. It was a straight person, a heterosexual, going to have sex with a male prostitute in the temple, and that was unnatural. Therefore, Paul's talking about in Romans 1 and in 1 Corinthians 6 the sin of unnatural sex between a heterosexual and another man in the temple. Now, how do you answer those? What do you say? It's not enough, church, just to say, well, you're just wrong. You've got to be able to intelligently answer and dialogue with these issues. And I believe the church is just punting talking about it. Let's just slam it and move on. Elton John recently said, a couple of weeks ago, he said Jesus was a gay man. What do you say about that? I think Elton John's wrong. I don't think Elton John's reading the Gospels that I'm reading. Or maybe he is, and he just reinterprets it. But folks, this isn't the only issue in our society where society reinterprets Scripture. You realize that, don't you? People in the society talk about Jesus not being the only way, even though Jesus says, I am the way. Well, that's not really what he meant. He's the way to many ways, right? He's a good doorway to walk through. He's a good teacher in all many religions, so he's kind of the doorway for all different truths. We've got to be able to talk about this stuff well. Number 3. We must understand that gay people are in our churches, because I think one of the primary mistakes of the church that we still make is presume that all gay people are outside the church. Statistically, there are many people in this room right here struggling with same-sex attraction. And this is the last place in the world they feel like they can be honest with it about. Number 4, there's not a special judgment for homosexuals or a special righteousness for heterosexuals. What I mean by that is, there are people that believe that certain sins will not be forgiven by God. We call it the unpardonable sin. The biblical unpardonable sin is living a life of rejection of God. That you die not trusting in Jesus. That won't be pardoned. But past that, there's not an unpardonable sin in your Bible. Now, 1/3 of Americans in the latest poll say they do believe there's an unpardonable sin. 1/4 of the evangelical church believes there's an unpardonable sin, but yet the Bible doesn't teach it. The core teaching of the Bible teaches that all sin at its core is rebellion against God. And that we are all sinners and we all fall short of the glory of God. John 3:16, you know it well, for God so loved the what? World. It doesn't say God so loved conservatives, for God so loved moral people, for God so loved heterosexuals, for God so loved church attenders, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son that what? Whosoever. Even a homosexual person, you betcha. Even a drug addict, you betcha. Even a broken person, you betcha. Even an alcoholic, you betcha. Even a gossip, you betcha. We're all broken, folks. Jesus went to the most broken and gave the most compassion. And yet we take the most broken in our cultures and we just disassociate from them. It's not biblical. It is true that sexual sins are particularly destructive in people's lives, but that's true of all sexual sin. Let me tell you, I have counseled many more heterosexuals about sexual sin than homosexuals about sexual sin. And it's all destructive. Porn addiction can destroy a family and destroy a marriage. Infidelity destroys families, destroys kids, destroys marriages. All sexuality is destructive. All sexuality is broken. And God gives potential for all people to be sexually healthy. Number 5, how we say what we believe is critical. The church must be a place of grace and love and truth. If we believe truth sets people free, but yet we use the truth to bash people, then we are being cruel with truth. I want to show you a video clip here. And this video clip we're using from a movie that we were given permission to use. This gentleman is at a gay rally on the West Coast, and he has set up a Catholic confessional booth, okay? And he is inviting people into the booth, and he is basically apologizing to them as a Christian for the jokes and the harsh comments and the insensitivities and the lack of compassion to them from himself and the church. Let's watch this together.
I gotta tell you, I was completely surprised by 2 things: the power of an apology and the willingness of people to engage. I think the apology created the foundation for the conversation.
Lastly, I guess, although the list could be numerous, I want to apologize for my own personal sins of partaking in gay jokes, laughing at them, telling them myself, for being allowing fear to drive me rather than faith, for being put off, being offended in ways that Jesus would not want me to be, in ways that are selfish and hurtful to others, frankly hurtful to others, when Jesus is really clear about how he asks for me to love one another. And I apologize for not doing that, for not loving you the way that I should.
I accept your apology, and I want to say thank you for speaking up, because I'm tired of people not speaking up anymore.
We should all apologize for all the things that we've done and thought and said, and just move on from there.
It's very touching, the apology. I'm not sure that I'm worthy of receiving the apology. That's the hard thing.
Well, it's very nice, and I forgive you, and thank you. And I wish that there were more people who would think it all like that.
Thank you so much for speaking this to me. I appreciate hearing these words. It does a lot to heal my heart. I was just thinking the same thing. How could Jesus' followers hate so much? And so it's lovely to hear this from you and know that you don't always hate us.
The young lady you saw there, the cute girl with the little orange hat, she talks elsewhere in the film that she grew up in church her whole life and was a leader in her youth ministry and started struggling with these feelings of same-sex attraction. And of course, obviously, the church had nothing or nowhere to go to talk to about these things for spiritual advice. Let me give you my 6th point. And this is the point of the whole morning. We're all broken, and I'm no different than you are. One of the enduring truths about Christianity is to love people the world sets up as our enemies. Everyone has sexual baggage, which means everyone has potential for sexual wholeness. For example, a large segment of born-again believers feel that cohabitation and sexual fantasies are not immoral. We are all struggling to be sexually whole, what God created. I think the ultimate goal of our lives, as we said over and over in this series and other series, is to point people to Jesus. We're all broken. I think we need to talk about Jesus regardless of the person. The gospel is good news to and for everybody. You know, everybody comes to church with their own agenda. People come to church with an agenda of, I hope they have the music I like. I hope he preaches the way I want. I hope he does the kind of series as I want. I hope the sanctuary looks the way I want. I hope they have a cross on the stage, off the stage, in the stage. I hope the baptism pool is pretty. I want you to know the only agenda that Austin Ridge Bible Church has is the gospel of Jesus Christ. And we're going to take everything we do here and we're going to put it against that backdrop to see if it matches the gospel. And if it doesn't, we're not going to promote it. People say things to me all the time like, why aren't you more political? Why don't you use your pulpit for candidates? Because I don't put my trust in a man or a woman. I put my trust in Jesus. Now, we'll talk about political issues if they're biblical issues. But the gospel is what we promote at Austin Ridge Bible Church. And the gospel says that Jesus loves everyone and desires that all men come to know him. And if we start saying that only applies to certain people without certain kinds of sins and certain kinds of lifestyles, folks, we have walked away from following Jesus. Homosexuality is just one facet of a sexually broken lifestyle. Jesus is the point. Morality is not the point. When you try to argue people in the kingdom, folks, it doesn't work.
When I was in high school, there was this boy named...
It doesn't work. We're going to see that in a minute. It's really good. Lord knows I've apologetically tried to argue a bunch of people in the kingdom. You know what wins people to Christ? The same thing that won you to Christ. You saw Jesus in somebody. Somebody was different. Somebody was kind. Someone protected you. Someone helped you. Someone encouraged you. Someone spoke truth with a platform of love into your life. And you went through a hard time and you started reflecting on it, or you went through a hard time and you sought after it, and God brought someone to you. For all of us, our only hope for the fraction of our souls is the cross of Christ. In my humble understanding of Jesus as a person, I see a man who sought to restore relationships, not destroy them. I see a man full of compassion who is crazy in love with those the religious crowd saw as the wrong crowd. French philosopher Albert Schweitzer once noted that example is not the main thing in influencing others, it's the only thing. We need to serve and love and change the perceptions. Not because we're compelled to set the record straight for Christianity, but because that is the way of Christianity. There are many of you, and I've spoken with many of you that have daughters, sons, moms, dads, cousins, friends, co-workers who are homosexual. People ask me, a guy asked me after the last service, what happens if you try to share truth with them and they just don't want to have anything to do with it? You know what? You love them as an unbeliever. You love them like crazy. You don't have to give the gospel every time you're with them. What you do is you love them like crazy and you wait for the opportunity for something in their life to happen, so they look for you for some insight and you share it with graciousness. I realize there's probably some people in this room going, I can't believe that he loves gay people. I can't believe that Jesus loved me enough to die for me. And I really can't believe he loved you enough. If we don't change the perceptions of this area of the church, the consequences are devastating. Not only for our church now, but in the future. And the generation our kids will come through as leaders in the church is not sexually the same generation that you came through. And you've got to understand it, and you're going to have to connect and relate, and you're going to have to train them to do so that we do that very well. Let me show you this short video that shows you what some of the consequences can be if we don't change these stereotypes.
When I was in high school, there was this boy named Roger, and he was outed, a gay kid, and his homosexual orientation became known. West Philadelphia High was a huge and tough inner city school. You can imagine what we did to this kid some 50 years ago when ignorance prevailed on this issue. We humiliated this kid at every turn. On Fridays, after phys ed, when all the other kids would go into the shower, Roger wouldn't go in with us. He was afraid to. When he took his turn, we waited for him with our wet towels, and when he came out, we would whip them and sting his little body. I wasn't there the day that they took Roger and dragged him into that shower room and shoved him into the corner. And while he yelled and screamed for mercy, 5 guys urinated all over him. I wasn't there when that happened. He went home. He went to bed at about 10 o'clock. They say it was about 2 o'clock in the morning that Roger went down to the basement of his house and he hung himself. And I knew I wasn't a Christian, because if I was a Christian, I would have been Roger's friend. You don't have to legitimate somebody's lifestyle in order to love that person, to be brother or sister to that person, and to stand up for that person.
My hope for the Ridge is that no matter where you've been, what you've done, what your struggle is, that this is a safe place to share it and have people love you well. Because that's what Jesus did. I'm going to ask our ushers to come forward, and we're going to have a time of communion together, which is a great opportunity for us to lay our hearts before the Lord and let Him show us where we have been wrong in judging. We've been coarse in joking. We've been unloving and un-Jesus-like in living. Maybe there's things you would like to confess to Him. Or maybe there's someone that you need to reach out to that maybe you've written off, because I promise you God has not written them off. And as they pass these elements out, I would ask you to hold on to them, and when you're ready and you feel like your heart is ready, go ahead and take those elements personally as we continue to worship together.